Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to the Qredible Live Broadcast. We're excited to be here with a bigger group of people, all from the Northeast region today. And I thought to kind of switch it up, instead of me introducing everyone and you having to listen to that, I'll let Peter and Mark kind of introduce themselves, and Brian, and we're going to set some context today around the conversation about a great upcoming event in Philly and just the importance in general of the roles these guys play in the cannabis industry, which they'll explain here in a minute. So, Peter, you want to kick us off and kind of introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and you don't have to lead with the fact that you're a notary republic. A notary republic.
Notary public.
Notary republic. All right.
Hello, everyone. Peter Sue. I am the Director of Specialty Banking for Hanover Bank. I've been in banking 23, 24 years or so. I've done a variety of things, middle market, private banking, etc. This is actually my third cannabis banking program, something I'm probably a little too proud of. I also acted as a consultant to a number of programs, so dozens of programs, banks and credit unions across the country, advising their other cannabis banking program. And I want to say on record that my trash talk has scared off Steve Schain. He didn't even show.
Show. He got called out and didn't show up in the schoolyard.
I feel like that clearly demonstrates that I won. So thank you.
Oh yeah, he's scared of you, Peter.
He's going to be fashionably late.
Most attorneys are usually afraid of notaries. So
intimidating. Well, thanks, Peter. We're so glad to have you here. And Mark, you want to give us a little intro on yourself?
My name is Mark Wolfrey, and I've been in banking between internal audit and compliance at institutions and consulting firms for about 25 years. I started off in bank branches at one little bank and then got into internal audit. But I've provided consulting services and internal audit services for institutions that bank cannabis industry. And we audit their programs to make sure that they can say that they have a sufficient system to be able to compliantly bank just about any industry. But we do cannabis also. But we work with all kinds of different banks. Non-cannabis banking banks, cannabis banking. We get to talk with institutions that are thinking about it and ask us to come in and talk to them about what is required to be able to go that route, and then we can work with them to help develop that program. And then there are other institutions where they've already gone down a lot of that route, and then they ask somebody like us to come in and audit the program they've developed. So they keep there is independence factors there. So if you've done one, you can't do the other.
Yeah.
So Mark is being a little modest there. That's actually become a key thing with most banks and credit unions, where there's a question of, is there third-party validation? Has someone come in and audited your program? Examiners ask it, boards ask it. So Mark's role is vital to, especially anything sort of high risk like cannabis.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. All right, well, thanks, Mark. We're glad to have you here. And then Brian, just give us a little intro. I know our audience knows you well, but anybody watching in who's not a Qredible enthusiast yet, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, what's interesting, I started my career in banking, actually selling to banks when I was 17 years old. I had big hair and a mustache when I was 17, so I looked older. But I started selling to community banks, and I really had a great heart for the banking business. And then I sort of went on to create software companies in financial tech and reg tech, and I'm now the founder, chairman, and CEO of Qredible, which is a reg tech quality management platform for the ecosystem of high risk businesses, primarily in cannabis, CBD, hemp, nutraceuticals, all of the above.
Awesome. All right. Well, I thought it would be useful, Mark, kind of why we've gathered here today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about ACAMS? And we want to talk a little bit about the upcoming Philly event, and then kind of have some conversations around, little teaser of what we'll be kind of discussing at that event coming up in a few weeks here. So give us a little feel for what that organization is, what your role is in it, and what their kind of purpose is.
I joined ACAMS probably about 14 years ago for the first time, and received my first certification from ACAMS, which is called the Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialist. ACAMS is the association of said certification, and that industry, they provide certifications greater than that now. I'm also what's called an ACAMS audit certification. They have various certifications that lay out a structure of education and requirements for experience to be able to show that you have the requisite understanding and experience to be able to be a anti-money laundering specialist, to be able to investigate anti-money laundering, to do risk assessments, to audit. They have specialty certifications so that you are showing that you can be a officer, a BSA officer that institutions required. And so they've been around for a long time, and they've been developing this bank of knowledge and professionals that work together, not just at a national level, which actually ACAMS is an international association. They have seminars, conferences internationally, but we also have local chapters. And ours is the Greater Philadelphia chapter, and we service pretty much the Southeast Pennsylvania, Southern Jersey, and we touch a little bit into Delaware. Now, there's chapters in a lot of these areas also that we work with to develop programming and training and education and be able to, and marketing of our local chapters out. And we are holding another event coming up this, I went sideways on you.
Yeah. Right. You literally went sideways.
I did. My phone went a little crazy on me.
And by the way, for our listeners, he is not a money laundering specialist. He's an anti-money laundering specialist.
That's funny because I had a Homeland Security investigator tell me one time, said that they actually watch the professionals in our industry, and if someone just vanishes from the industry, sometimes they'll start looking around like, what happened to that person? They had a lot of institutional knowledge on money laundering and how to do that. And they start looking, what happened to people that have left the industry?
Well, we are in New Jersey over here at Qredible, so, you know.
Yeah. And the good news is you guys have all now said this live on the internet.
Yeah. There you go. We're going to get canceled before we even get started. Hey, there he is.
Hey,
right.
Well, Steve, there was a lot of trash talk about you that you got afraid of Peter and wouldn't even show up because he called you out.
No, I just, I thought it was going to be a professional, high-level thing, and I saw you invited Peter, so I
thought it was because you were an anti-notary.
Peter has many fine qualities, I'm told. Not that kind of person. But listen, let's not make it a personal attack. Let's talk about banking.
Well, there Steve, did you know Peter's a notary?
Did I know Peter is a notary? He seems to bring that at every conversation. And to be fair, I mean, and just, again, not to take away from Peter, I was captain of the JV crew team at Harrison High School. So
we all have accolades. Well, Steve, we're excited for you to have joined us. And we got their intros a little earlier, but I want to kind of step back and make sure you have an opportunity. Mark was talking us through ACAMS and kind of the role of that organization, his role in it, their purpose. And so let's go ahead and bounce back to you, because I want to get a little feel for who you are, what your role is, obviously, especially related to the cannabis industry. And then we're going to kind of pre-talk a little bit about our upcoming event.
Sure. Hey, I'm a longstanding financial services attorney. I've been doing this for, God help me, since 1989, and representing all banks, whether credit unions or larger banks like Chase, and a beloved memory, Washington Mutual Bank. And then one day when I was asleep, somebody blindfolded me, gagged me, and dragged me kicking and screaming into the regulated substances industry of cannabis, hemp, and hallucinogens. So we're a global law firm, And in addition, representing financial service providers who represent people who grow, process, sell, and transport marijuana, industrial hemp, and all sorts of hallucinogens, and the ancillary industries that support legalized marijuana, industrial hemp, and hallucinogens. And we're everywhere where there's cannabis. And unfortunately, that often involves Peter Sue. But again, I don't want to dwell on that and take away from the viewers' enjoyment of the whole proceeding. But we do everything for everybody. I've practiced cannabis and hallucinogens law in every state, all 38 states that have a legalized cannabis program, in overseas, Canada, every place. And that's what we do. And I also work a lot presenting at different events. Peter and I presented topics similar to this one at the International Cannabis Bar Association and onto MJ Biz. MJ Biz is a big service provider. But I also teach cannabis law and hallucinogens law at Stockton University. I know this event is focusing on being rather regional. Stockton, or as we call it, the Harvard of the Pine Barrens, is about 10 miles west of Atlantic City, but it's one of 5 programs in the nation with a minor in cannabis studies. Also ranked 7th in the nation in graduating people of color. One of the great things we bring to in legalized marijuana, industrial hemp, and hallucinogens is we're sort of at the forefront of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Interesting.
Wonderful.
Hey,
Yeah, and
Steve, how many
speaking of
shots
that,
did
Mark
you have
was
to do
just
before you worked up the courage to come on and face me. How much?
What was that, Peter?
Were you late because you were pounding back shots to drum up your courage? Is that what happened? Or?
I consider it medication. If somebody can get through the day, I know that Mr. Wolfrey is certainly dedicated a large portion of his time and his calories into the world of malt beverages. But like most great cannabis attorneys, I share my passion with a little drink calling itself tequila. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not just for breakfast anymore. It's just tequila all day, every day. But, I believe I've tossed a glass or 2 back. In fact, I believe we did in Vegas once or twice.
I have to tell you, I think this is probably the most exciting panel of bankers, lawyers, and auditors that I've ever been.
Well, speaking
back to the program,
Mr. Sue and myself, it's the most debauched.
Got it.
But I'll tell you one thing, it's going to be a terrific event. I've worked with Mark and Peter a lot, and people are extremely knowledgeable and committed to both financial services and cannabis and anti-money laundering. And I know we have some terrific amount of content. Sometimes it can be a little bit of dry, financial services can be a little dry. And I think Peter would agree with me that there's no shortage of malarkey in legalized marijuana. So we're going to come out and give a program that gives people the straight poop, hopefully in an entertaining and informative way, and talk about some things. And Peter and I have been down this road a couple times are the great savior of financial services and cannabis people claim is going to be the Safer Banking Act. But as Peter and I have chewed over once or twice, it may not be everything it's chalked up to. I know the participants are going to understand about what happens in cannabis, what happens with legacy cash, what happens with operating cash, what's the best way to deal with it. If you're open to dealing with a person who grows, processes, and sells and transports cannabis, what to look for in onboarding, what to avoid, and perhaps down the road, maybe we'll talk a little bit about lending and other kind of financial services that can be provided for participants in the cannabis industry.
There's been a lot of talk about safer banking and whether the Safer Banking Act is going to sort of change the requirements. And I've sort of had to educate people, like they magically think that if safer banking is passed, then all these requirements for BSA and AML, they start to go away, and which is clearly not the truth. I mean, it becomes more pertinent that there be proper auditing. And so what is the group's thought about if let's say the rescheduling happens from 1 to 3? Some people think that's going to pave the way for safer banking. So let's talk about that first, and then we'll talk about the sort of the aspects of what happens when and if safer banking happens this year. So there's some opinions that think that the rescheduling is going to pave the way for safer banking, and others say that it's just too unclear as to whether that'll be an impact. Any thoughts on that?
Can I keep going?
Yeah. please?
Yeah, there's no relationship between the two. You have two separate tracks. So the two topics on the table now are the relationship between descheduling or rescheduling and safer banking, and then what, if anything, does safer banking in its current incarnation. Because, Mark has seen me speak before. God knows Peter Sue has endured me. The last thing I would ever do is take away from, and let's call it the geniuses, because they are geniuses down in DC. All the legislators and all the regulators are the smartest and best people. They have the best, interests of our industry together. So there's no question about that. But the question is, what's really going to happen? So when cannabis goes from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, which I think will happen, it's only going to have two substantive impacts on the industry in terms of the legality. Number one, it'll remove 280E, which imposes onerous tax requirements on cannabis, and it'll make all of our clients more profitable, hopefully. Number two, it'll help out with the medical research aspect. Right now, again, they're geniuses. Please, please, please I don't think these legislators are brainiacs. But right now, according to our leaders in Washington, D.C., cannabis has zero medical application, cannot be used safely, and sit next to heroin on Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substance Act, even though legalized marijuana generated $33 billion in legalized revenue in 2023, and Epidiolex, a product used to treat severe pediatric epilepsy, was approved and is all descheduled, even though that's what your Congress would have you believe. So if it comes down to Schedule 3, another positive thing is it should free up the application for medical research. And the greater medical research and federally funded studies happen, the more application we'll find out what's the wheat and what's the chaff. Safer Banking Act has no relationship to that at all. It's a separate piece of legislation. And even if cannabis drops down to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substance Act, it would still make every deposit or withdrawal of funds a violation of the Bank Secrecy Act. So the actual Safer Banking Act, again, we don't know because there's going to be a good deal of horse trading before the final product is put out. But all it really does, and again, Peter may have a different point of view, not nearly as well thought out as mine. But again, Peter's been working hard. He's killing it. He's trying. So we've got to, give a lot of credit to Mr. Sue. But all the Safer Banking Act really does is one of the big problems now is most financial institutions, for the purpose of our presentation, will define as banks and credit unions, they're having terrible problems getting depository insurance. So fewer of them do that. And another thing it will do is it incorporates the rather stringent requirements of what's called the FinCEN guidance. Like all great industries of faith, we have our commandments. Cannabis always gets the raw deal, so we don't have 10 commandments in cannabis. We have 8 commandments, and the commandments are actually called the Cole Memorandum Priorities. Our governing body of law is actually something which is a memo put out by the Justice Department called the Cole Memorandum, 3 memorandum, exactly. And after the third of these 3 memorandum, which have 8 enforcement priorities, after that happened the same day, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network put out what's called the FinCEN guidance. And the FinCEN guidance lists requirements for both onboarding a plant-touching marijuana-related business and the daily requirements of providing financial services we're defining as depository accounts. And those are rather onerous. So, banks are not afraid of risk. On that, we can all agree. But banks are interested in 2 things. Number 1, profits. And number 2, risks they can manage. And the Cole Memorandum thing makes it very, very expensive to provide financial services to marijuana-related businesses. And the other thing the Safer Banking does is take this, frankly, memo and makes it a body of law. You could also argue that the Safer Banking Act in its current incarnation removes any criminal exposure for executives. I would say there is no criminal exposure in banking, which some would say creates reticence. Not people of valor who are true blue like Peter Sue, but weaker, more timid banking executives. The problem with that is, and here's where Peter and I disagree, or among the many, many places in which Mr. Sue and I are at loggerheads, is that's all it does. And it really doesn't make banking more affordable. So it's not an issue of legality, it's one of profitability. So even if the Safer Banking Act passed, I don't think it would change a great deal. And the real problem with this, it's very expensive to run financial services to marijuana-related businesses because the FinCEN guidance requires the filing of what are called certain reports with SARS, suspicious activity reports, with either every deposit or withdrawal. You could argue that. With if something fishy, it's a priority SAR and a termination SAR. And each of these reports have to be filed with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and it's expensive. And as a result of it, that if you go down the supply chain, credit card companies do not want to provide merchant services to marijuana-related businesses because they don't want to file these reports. The average credit card company makes about 2% on a sale. If we look to New Jersey, the average purchase where Mr. Sue makes his home, unlike perhaps the slightly more elegant folks of Pennsylvania. Again, I don't want to make this antagonistic, but the average purchase in New Jersey is about $92, the average cannabis purchase, which means if you're making $2 per sale, $2 per sale you're making, a little bit less. Do you really want to have to file a suspicious activity report and update it? Most credit card companies don't. So as a result, although you can use your debit function on your credit card and have to pay a fee, you can't use your credit function. And as a result...
Well, Steve, I want to make sure. So if Safer Banking passes, do those SARs still have to be filed for card transactions?
Yes.
You're saying yes, but so... And when would that go? Would that go away if cannabis became federally legal?
It could go away two ways. As a result, we call it the waterfall. As a result of cannabis federal illegality, which is the top of the waterfall, you got on the next level, every deposit or withdrawal of sums theoretically related to a cannabis-related purchase is a violation of the Bank Secrecy Act because it's a federal crime, although it's legal in 38 states, the Commonwealth of Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Marinette Islands, and it generated $33 billion. Again, I can't say enough about the bright folks we have in D.C. They're the best. They're saying it's still federally illegal and has no medical application. So as a result of that, marijuana-related businesses are also denied certain privileges. For example, the privilege of bankruptcy, although it's a basic creditor tool, basic debtor tool as well, that you can't do that because that's considered a federal privilege. You can't get a federal trademark if you're a marijuana-related business because it's 100% illegal. All descheduling from Schedule 1 or downscheduling to Schedule 3 does is it makes it less of a penalty. It still is 100% federally illegal, so it doesn't take us under the auspices of the Bank Secrecy Act.
But there's some important implications. I come from the I spent many years in the mortgage, residential mortgage side, and currently, if you're an executive at a cannabis company, your income from that cannabis company cannot be used to qualify you for a mortgage because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac backs.
Right, that changes too. That is part of the Safer Banking Act. I got to catch myself because it's always been called the Safe Banking Act.
Right.
And there's nothing new under the sun. Peter, what is the fourth incarnation of the legislation? It's been around for a while.
This is the 9th time through.
The 9th. But the current one, the Safer, yes, it does provide for that you can use that to calculate that.
So some positive stuff. Peter, what say you about the whole situation?
Well, first, just keeping on a professional level, Steve is totally wrong about everything, literally. Not even necessarily this topic, but just in general.
But I got your name right. It's Peter Sue. I got that.
No, I'm sorry. All joking aside, I actually agree with Steve, which I'm loath to admit. Well, it depends how you look at it. So safer banking, right? Like if you're from the vantage point of a bank that is already doing it, and according to FinCEN, there's 812 financial institutions already banking cannabis, right? Which I think, most insiders agree that number is, way out of whack. But regardless, that's the official statistic. So if 812 financial institutions are already banking cannabis, according to FinCEN, the reality is that safer is relatively meaningless to them, because safer is nothing more than a safe harbor language carved out of the BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act, right? So in other words, if you're an institution like myself that has made the institutional decision, okay, we're willing to accept this risk, we're going to do this. Well, kind of nothing technically kind of changes, right? It could prompt other institutions to make that decision, and that could be a net positive relative to costs, services, capacity, etc. It could, and maybe that's where Mark can jump in as far as like, and Mark, you don't have to say names, but are institutions asking those types of questions like, hey, we're thinking about this?
Absolutely. We've worked with several institutions.
Before Mark jumps in, I got to, as apparently is my work in this life, correct yet another misrepresentation by Mr. Sue. We don't know how many banks are willing and voluntarily providing financial services to marijuana-related business. The statistic Peter gave you was how many filed suspicious activity reports. Mm-hmm. And there's quite a disconnect. As Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mark. But again, I have to be the beacon of light.
Well, I was hoping you'd have something to say today.
I am, but
we got to get Steve out of his shell. That's
yeah. Again, if can I get this drink replenished here? The ice is getting. But as Mark and I can get into, not in great detail, we are part of a group which does sort of a BSA group of Bank Secrecy Act people, and sometimes we drop our guards and we circulate thing, we talk about stuff, and I can just tell from that group, Mark, a number of people come up to me and say, we're not openly and willingly providing financial services to cannabis companies, but we do know of it, so we have to file these reports, although ideally we like to clear it from our books. Is that inaccurate, Peter and Mark?
So are you guys saying it's higher or lower?
It's much lower.
There's
much. So what Peter Sue didn't tell you is that, and this I don't think was a misrepresentation, is that the visions of sugar plums are dancing in people's minds in cannabis, both on people who want to grow, process, and sell it, and also banking. And, because I say nothing but the truth, Peter does have some good qualities. And Peter is one of the few bankers I've been involved with a number of years who can successfully bank cannabis. He understands the industry. But a lot of banks don't have the resources, the commitment, or frankly, the know-how to get in there because it's a very nuanced type of thing. It's a thin margin, and you got to know what you're doing, and you got to have the staff. And there's only a handful of people in America who've really have done it accurately and in a sustained way. So people come in with great hue and cry and say, we are going to open a cannabis banking thing, and they disappear 10 seconds later because many of their clients are not what they think they are, and they haven't done the necessary to build out a program like Peter has, and Peter has done it in more than one bank. So again, I will give credit where credit's due. He is good at his job. I'm sorry, Mark, and I interrupted you.
Yeah, sorry. When it comes to us coming in and looking at an institution, and there are out there, I've looked at several, and you go in there and it's basically the Cole memo is your jump off, and you take that Cole memo, and we've created an audit program, and it's system agnostic, it's institution agnostic, and you go about asking questions, listening, reading documentation they have, and figuring out, and then looking at the systems they have in place. How are their systems working? What are they actually doing? Are they doing what they think they're doing? And looking to see are you actually looking at those, looking at your clients and identifying whether their activity is compliant or not. And it's that what Steve was saying is so difficult because I've had two clients that I've looked at that vanished right after I did my audit because it was just they didn't want to take the time and effort to put in what I found to be missing, and that's the difficult part. because they think they're in the clear, they think they're running, and really they're missing. You're missing half the scene. They're missing half of what they should be doing. It's an expense. Like some of the things, a institution can't have one client. You can't get into the business and have one cannabis company that you're doing. You're not going to be able to get the revenue. You need to have several, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and you're going to have the staff to be able to manage that. And you can't. And honestly, to hope you can build out the staff as you grow is probably not a good way to go, because once one cannabis company finds out you're willing to bank them, you're going to get a second, third, fourth, fifth at the door asking, because they're always looking for somebody to take their money. I mean, one of the big things I've seen is cannabis stores are commonly built in old banks.
Yeah.
So they have a big vault to put everything in, including their cash at night. And the security concerns around those facilities are immense. The amount of times where people have come into those cannabis stores and found people waiting for them to open their vault for them with ill intent. It's quite an industry, and those are the kind of things a financial institution has to consider when they're looking at companies, whether or not we want you to bank with us and whether or not we can manage the risk that you're going to bring in.
Also, part of the thing is the food chain, or if that's the right word for it, I guess the food chain is the correct term for it, of a cannabis company. So let's look at New Jersey right now. 2.5 years ago, there were 12 grow, process, or dispensaries called alternative treatment centers. 12. In the 2.5 years since then, New Jersey has given out plus or minus 1,700 licenses. Most of those licenses are essentially lemonade stands. The people don't know how. They're going to hope to have on-the-job training. They're going to hope to raise the money, learn this whole thing, launch a successful business, and maybe sell it. But we all know, and I don't know you well, but I know that Peter and Mark and I know very well, most of them are not going to see the light of day. So you're dealing with people who have on-the-job training. Now, in addition to providing financial services, any banker with his salt is a trusted advisor. They can help you avoid mistakes, but they're only good if you give them the ability to do so. And if you're afraid to be honest with your banker of what you're doing, and let's call it what it is, most marijuana-related businesses don't necessarily disclose to their banks that they're applicants for a marijuana license because they're afraid if they do, they're not going to get banking services. So they start with a history of deception. They may come from what we call the legacy market in cannabis, meaning that they're selling stuff illegally. And people who, anybody ever see the movie The Princess Bride? There's a great line from The Princess.
I'm old enough.
Peter's seen it, I get the impression. He knows where I'm going. There's a great line in The Princess Bride where one genius says to another genius, you know, people in masks are not to be trusted. So people who are used to selling cannabis illegally tend not to dot the I's and cross the T's. And we got to call it as it is. That's our heritage. They're at the very least not detail-oriented. So to get in there and be successful like Peter is, and a few other people like Sunday Seyfried, and people who really know how to get involved in a system and help mature a company, that takes access, that takes credibility. And that's not an easy thing to do. And also, cannabis is a very difficult business to be successful. Very few people, Mark and Peter, believe that because they know it, but it's a hard business. It generates enormous revenue. It generates enormous headlines. Heaven knows it generates a huge amount of anecdotes. But to have a sustainable, profitable business is rather a rare thing. And when businesses are facing adversity, that's when you can really tell who's a good business person or not. And if you're new to the game, most cannabis companies are startups. So most businesses fail within 10 years. Startups fail more greatly. All cannabis companies are startups. So the great bête noire the terrible beasts cannabis companies face, as if they're startups, they don't know what they're doing and they lack capitalization. And if they're sustained, if they're what we call multi-state operator or heaven help us publicly traded, well, then every quarter they have to meet certain forecasts. And that's a hard thing to do in a down market. Mm-hmm. Peter and I have not had the chance to talk about this, but I know darn well Peter has some strong thoughts about the demise of MedMen. MedMen was one of the game changers in cannabis. They created the Apple Store of dispensaries, making dispensaries safe and uniform in West Hollywood. And the jewel of their crown, the West Hollywood thing, just closed this week, right, Peter? And that is shocking to people like us, because that was the cornerstone of the modern dispensary. When it wasn't what was called a trap store where you worried about being robbed on your way out. It was safe, clean, and seniors could go there buy cannabis. And that's a huge deal. Now, let's say you're Mark Wolfrey or you're Peter, and you've got to provide services to this range of either companies that are facing adversity or people who don't know the first thing, and they haven't kept books, much less provided you with audited books. That is a hard situation.
And that never happens though in the industry.
And that's a big problem in the accounting industry when it comes to being able to give audited financial to these companies, because anybody that's really able to do an audited financial statement would be a CPA firm, and to provide services directly to a cannabis company can bring a problem to your CPA license. That is another problem. There's even for an accounting firm to get into that industry, there are a couple big limits on the CPA license. To insurance industry is not really willing to provide insurance to CPA firms that are doing that. So that's a big impediment.
We've had on as our guest, and is actually part of our Qredible marketplace, Mike Gural and Armanino, and we've talked a lot about these issues. And Armanino's a fairly large accounting company that's providing these services, but it is so critical what you're talking about. And what I have noticed in the industry is you see more suits at the conventions now, because the investors that are in there that started to lose money, they're demanding a higher level of accountability into these companies.
Yeah, but there's a less lofty way of saying it, which is, watch Peter smile, the stupid money's gone. So
that is true.
Cannabis is the bastion of dreamers and entrepreneurs. And all kidding aside, we like to have fun. And the presentation we're going to give at the end is going to be even more ribald than this one. But all kidding aside, I have a lot of respect for the people in the cannabis industry because they're risk takers. I am not. They are entrepreneurs. I am not. And there's quite a lot to be said. You might say it's the American spirit to just go on instinct, to put everything you have on the line, to go where no one has gone before and take that risk. That is not easy to do, and that is to be lauded. Yeah. Having said that, people like that by definition are not great at keeping records. And to see something that's not there, to walk that tightrope, really doesn't mean you're going to spend a whole lot of time with your accountant.
But Steve, I think, but my point is, it's got to be Cannabis 2.0. That has to change. And when the stupid money exits stage left, right, the smart money that is going to do it is going to do it on a 2.0 level. I mean, there's a lot of them lost money on the first go around. And we're now, my point is, the investors I'm talking to are demanding, standard operating procedures. They're demanding audited financial statements. They're demanding, good practices and systems that can be tracked and audited, because they're not going to put their money in to these companies because the dude knows how to grow pot. I mean, that's not what that was the stupid money. That was 1.0. and I'm seeing the maturity on 2.0. It has to happen for this industry to move forward.
I think we're making different points here. So yeah, the dreamers are gone. Yes. You and I could spend a great deal of time, and again, there will be an after party. Mark Wolfrey is hosting at Creed's after our event, and where he will be, we'll have a sampling of all the finer things in life, because that's how Mark rolls. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, make sure you pay your credit card down, Mark, because it's going to be a big
But to be candid, I don't know how much investment capital is there at the moment. Cannabis peaked in February of 2021. We've seen as much as a 92% drop in the valuations of publicly traded companies. I know my clients are having a devil of a time getting any kind of financing, and the financing is pretty usurious. So typically, cannabis companies, for various reasons, sought primarily equity financing, mostly because they couldn't get debt financing, but also because the mindset of an entrepreneur is, I don't want to service a monthly amount. I'd rather pay it off at the end, because I'm building a better light bulb, and I'll stagger through, 36 months, and then I'll soon be lighting cigars with $100 bills. So they go for equity financing. But at this point, it's just a more developed market, and there's been more failure. I don't know how much investment capital is out there. We can talk more about it, but the investors out there are sitting on the sidelines.
No, I agree with that. My point is that it's heating up a little bit, but the game is going to change tremendously for those folks to come back in. It has to.
If you look at those THC mutual funds out there, they don't do well at all.
It will, but there is so much more in this and to be with. So we talk about the impact of Schedule 3. No one knows. And that's the most important thing. They were giving out crystal balls one day, but that day, for some reason, Peter, Sue, Mark, and I weren't there. So we can't see into the future like so many experts can. And even though I chair the financial services group of a global law firm, and we've been doing it for 10 years and doing it better than anybody else, I have no idea what the hell Schedule 3 is going to look like. For example, does that mean that cannabis will have to be sold in pharmacies? Because that's a possibility. That's a pretty strong possibility. And if that happens, that means we're going to have interstate commerce from pharmacies selling federally approved cannabis, but still have a state system where it can't leave state confines and is sold in state-run stores. What's that going to look like? I don't know. And nobody knows. So the way it's going to unfold is quite unclear. Second, one of the raging concerns that expose this is, what is an intoxicant? We're using the word cannabis rather fluidly, and cannabis is defined by, again, I want to give a big shout out to the geniuses and all the regulatory agencies, which your Drug Enforcement Administration seems to define cannabis one way, which is called Delta-9. And Delta-9 cannabis is highly regulated, but there are other forms of cannabis out there that are cultivated from what's called hemp, that we'll be talking more about on February 28th, which are called Delta-6, Delta-10, and Delta-8, which are not regulated. So we have basically much safer regulated cannabis for sale in a system that's highly regulated than we have what I would call this ditch weed out there being sold at every smoke shop and gas station from here to East Jabip, and heaven knows what's in it. What's going to happen? So we see a movement forward. Peter and I involved in other trade organizations. One's called the American Society of Testing and Measurement, which has a separate division devoted to cannabis. And we're focusing now on changing the discussion to what's an intoxicant. So the cannabis industry had now splintered into Delta-9 and the alternatives. But are they considered intoxicants? I don't know. But it's cutting into our industry, and that creates a lot of kerfuffle too. And also,
I know you don't have all the answers, Steve, but Peter told us you would have all the answers on this call, and so.
Well, one of the issues Peter faced, and they are legion, is he's got I think it's called idolatry, but the pedestal on which he's placed me low these many years is stunted. And don't kid yourself. He's a solid person. He has potential. Is it realized? Well, we'll find out on the 28th. I mean, that's one of the many.
That is, and folks, you really need to, if you're in and about the Philly area, you got to show up to that event. This is amazing.
The Sheraton in King of Prussia is where it'll be on February 28th. Mm-hmm. Registration starts at 5:30. The online registration will be launching Monday or Tuesday next week. We work with our national organization ACAMS to be able to. They host that on their site for us, so that they'll be able to launch that early next week. And we have some information flyers out on LinkedIn on their Qredible site. So please come out and join us. It'll be an informative time, and afterwards we'll be over at Creed's having a fun time. But we also will be talking about what's also called Tier 1. This is called a Tier 1 type. We're talking about banking Tier 1s, but you also be talking a little bit about Tier 2s and Tier 3s, which are also in my mentor here, Mr. Schain, he explained to me one time about a specific Tier 2 that was doing well. And I heard recently that, I'm not going to name it by name, but it was more of a fertilizer company, and it had a spinoff, and apparently it recently even crashed. So even Tier 2s seem to be having trouble, and which were supposed to be some of the best ways to get into this industry, and it didn't do too well.
No, and that can I mention the name of the company, or you just not want to mention it?
I don't mind if you do. I just wasn't going to.
Scott's
you're an attorney.
A subsidiary called Hawthorne, and the great thing about, again, there's absolutely no shortage of malarkey in legalized marijuana, industrial hemp, and hallucinogens. And the great thing about Scott is, at one point their stock tripled one day or something like that over a period of time. So everybody thought they had all the answers. Again, nobody has all the answers. Nobody knows. We're all guessing. But everyone looked at them as an industry leader, and they're not. But then Tier 1 really deals with plant touching. Tier 2 are people who provide ancillary services to the plant touching, like me. And there's Tier 3 in terms of it. But actually, Peter, you and I haven't really spoken to you since late November, December. But a mutual friend of ours is saying that a number of banks have gotten out of the game. Have you seen that in your travels? That fewer banks, there's been a lot of hue and cry with banks coming into it, but a number of banks have gotten out of cannabis. Have you? But this is just something I heard at a trade show, and frankly, I drink. So, what was your experience with that, Peter? Have you seen banks coming out, or are people still rushing into the game?
This sounds like you're trying to set me up. Banks are
getting Dana. Dana Chavez said that she told me the name of banks that come out, and Dana has built a number of banks too, and that she's done a number of banks have come out of cannabis. But
lately, a number of institutions have exited, closed down their cannabis program, etc. I mean, to some extent, I think that's fairly natural. There's always this sort of evolution, right? Like, so a little bit to what Steve was talking about earlier. I think sometimes. You get projections, right? You think, oh, New York's going to be a hot market. I'm going to invest into a cannabis banking program. Now, 2-3 years in, we're still struggling with rolling out licenses and stuff like that. So imagine being that bank or that credit union that invested money, and in some cases, real dollars, right? They hired consultants, they hired these compliance firms and significant fees, employees, etc. And then if you're unable to Mark's point, if you're unable to scale, and you can't generate enough income, like any business, right? Like banks are businesses too, right? So yes, it is unfortunate. And in fact, I can see how that could be an issue if safer banking pops up, where perhaps it actually has the opposite effect. If you think about the motivation, right, of a bank that jumped in, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, when rates were zero, it was purely for fee income. And now when that fee income dries up because you're no longer able, not that you can't charge anymore, but because the market pressure prevents you from doing so, what's the natural decision? Let's just stop it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that a lot in community banking with like indirect automobile lending, for example. You know, they'd
Yeah.
get in, they'd get out, they get in, they get out. You know, and it depended on the risk appetite of the bank and what
Right.
they were looking for at the time. You know, in that particular case, if they were high on deposits, they needed to generate more lending to put
High on
the
deposits. I get it.
yeah.
Very,
There you go.
very
High on
clever.
deposits.
Very
It was
clever.
bound to happen, right? But it's but that, so I think what you were saying is it's going to be natural as well if they depending on the risk,
But
of the
there's
appetite.
there's a natural attrition. That's just the way that things go. But the thing of it is, banking follows the actual industry. So I built out a banking program for a bank in Georgia, and they were based on one client that they thought that was going to be the bellwether to justify the entire program for Georgia's program. And then that client sort of failed, which is a big multi-state operator, or suffered its problems. And then they kind of made the program quiescent. So they said, okay, we're going to give it a shot, see what happens. And it didn't develop fast enough. And we've seen that in many different jurisdictions. There's some people who have built out sustainable areas, but the problem is sometimes feast or famine. So if you look at an area like California, where there were just a zillion cannabis companies back in 2018 when they became a state adult use. And then all stuff was going to happen, and then people were rushing to the banks, and now the companies are failing terribly. In Oklahoma, a third of the licenses chose not to renew in 2023. A third of the license holders chose not to renew their licenses. That's a pretty staggering thing. It doesn't mean that they hadn't launched. It doesn't mean they weren't generating revenue. They just decided they could make more money doing something else, so they just tendered their license and shut down operations. So if you're a bank that's built out a program to support this industry and the industry's dying, how much resources are you going to have for your program to support cannabis, hemp, and hallucinogens?
Yeah, that makes sense. And as we're starting to wrap up, one of the things that I keep thinking about is there one place to go where you can find out what banks are actually banking cannabis, because it seems like a mystery and some of them are still in the closet. So, any resources you guys know of to find out how you can see which banks are really in the business and which ones are not?
No, that's a well-guarded secret. I actually keep a list of banks myself that I give to clients, but people don't want to share that information for a lot of reasons. Number one, that obviously,
since we promised some controversy,
reputation.
Schain, have you seen the PBC banking directory?
Well, yeah, but that directory is ridiculous. They got 12 banks.
Sure.
They got 12 banks, and 13 of them went out of business 10 minutes ago. But again, that if you look at the SARS filing, it lists a certain amount of banks that file SARS. But how many of them are openly and providing financial services to cannabis-related companies? That's a bit of a mystery. And honestly, you don't want them to get out there. The problem is that these people are in competition with each other. If there's 1,700 licenses that have been granted in the last year and a half in New Jersey, they're all going to turn on their lights simultaneously, and they all can't succeed. So my clients don't necessarily want their resources shared with other clients. And a lot of banks that do that, if you find out they're doing it, they only have so much room for so many cannabis clients. So there's a famous bank in California called North Bay Credit Union, and they opened up the floodgates, and then everybody came in. They had to shut down. So you sort of have to keep it quiet.
Makes sense.
So Brian, for your audience, since Steve Shane's unwilling to share, apparently they can call me and I'll tell them.
I didn't say I wouldn't share. Clients of
literally what
Smart
you just
Counsel
said.
always get full access to all of Steve Schain. Yeah, it's like that too. But it's also too. It's not even necessarily knowing the bank; it's knowing the banker. So all kidding aside, it's knowing a Peter Sue or someone like that. Because what happens in more often than not, people don't realize banks are not monolithic, and often the people at the front end want to do something that hasn't necessarily been approved by the board. So I've had a number of clients over the years who the banker goes, yeah, open the account, but we're going to call you Ray's Marshmallow Factory, not Peter's House of Dope. And, if it's Ray's Marshmallow Factory, then no one's going to know anything about it. And honestly, most people your chances are 1 in 11 if it's a competitive license application, by and large, 1 in 11 of getting a license. And the Controlled Substance Act only really forbids people who are growing, processing, selling, or transporting cannabis. So if you fill out an application, you're not really in the auspices of the controlled substance yet, so banks shouldn't turn you away. So let's say fortune smiles upon you and you get a license. Fantastic. Now all you have to do is go out, raise $28 million, and start growing, processing, and selling cannabis. Okay, let's say you do that. Until you actually have grow, processed, or sold, you're not in the cannabis industry yet. And then at that point, it's a game changer. And one thing we haven't is, although it's gotten a lot more reasonable, banks often impose fees on cannabis-related companies. It got as ridiculous as the Bank of Marion, Illinois, in my travels, put a fee of, believe it or not, $10,000 per month per account for depository accounts for a plant touching cannabis related company.
Wow.
The Bank of Marion, Illinois is no longer in the cannabis company. Our prayers were answered. But that shows you how ridiculous it can be. The fees have come way down, but having competitive fees is a big issue.
That Soprano National Bank, was that what?
Well, I mean, you got to remember the cost of the professional.
Bada bing savings and loan.
Bada bing savings and loan. That's a good one. And their sole customer is Peter's House of Dope.
Peter's
Right.
And that's why I was saying earlier that you can't do this with one client. You really need an economies of scale if you're going to get into it, because if you're not charging $10,000 per month, I mean, the cost of regulatory compliance is significant. Staffing, systems, time. It's, ACAMS people don't come cheap. So it's people with experience in identifying and tracking and reporting on SARS. It's not an inexpensive industry to be in. So it's the $10,000 a month. That's $120,000 a year. I mean, you're talking that's a staff person or two. That's what, like 1.5 staff people in banking that are professionals in that industry.
Wow.
Well,
Joy, why don't you, if Joy, you want to, are we coming up on time here? Do you want to give us a reminder again?
We
of this
are.
event?
So, we definitely, what a great discussion today, guys. Appreciate all of your contributions. And, I think that there is so much. We got a lot of comments, including some questions. So I don't know. I know some of y'all are super active on LinkedIn. If you want to go in there and answer anything, or comment back on anybody's, we got quite a few kudos. Somebody really liked Mark's comment. He said, preach, so much truth, nailed it, Mark, etc. So if you would like to go feel good about yourself, feel free to go to the comment section, or answer and educate anything there. Feel free to do that as well. So appreciate you all being on the Qredible Live Broadcast. What a great time. Look forward to seeing everybody. So February 28th, Mark, you want to give us a quick recap again, just about location and registration process? I know you mentioned it before, but let's kind of wrap with that. And then
there'll be links. The link to be able to go to register, pre-register will be out on LinkedIn, under my profile, under the Greater Philadelphia chapter of ACAMS profile, under your profile. There'll be several places you'll be able to go for to get that link to the ACAMS website to do the registration, pre-registration, and then the event is on February 28th. Registration there that night will start at 5:30. Event starts at 6. And it's a Sheraton in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. I really like that area because there's so many different highways that come in around from the tri-state area that makes it very easy to get into that area and be able to attend. And in and out at that hour is still very easy coming out of Philadelphia and all the surrounding suburbs.
Yeah, and Steve's buying drinks for everyone afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
What'd you say?
Great, we'll end there.
Well,
Bring a clean credit card.
Wait a second, Mark. You haven't even mentioned the swimsuit competition.
He's sponsoring the after party.
Where will that be in the same location?
TBD.
That'll be in Creed. So wear your Speedo. Bring your Speedo, Steve.
Peter, I'm doing my sit-ups. You're in for a world of trouble.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Good weekend.
Thank you.
Take care.